So here on my right, I have Edward Bouygues. He's the Deputy CEO of Bouygues Group, a diversified service group operating in 4 sectors: construction, energy and services, and media and telecommunications. Also with us, Josep Maria Recasens. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Renault Group, the international car manufacturing, and also the CEO of Ampere, an electric vehicle and software company that was founded in 2023 by the Renault Group. And also here with us, Wendy Woods. She is the Vice Chair, Managing Director, and Senior Partner of Boston Consulting Group. She works with organizations to create sustainable energies and partnerships that help clients create a positive impact in the world, strengthen their market competitive position, and build resilience. So thank you, the 3 of you. I think we have finalized this first panel with a very positive note from our panelists. So maybe let's keep the good tone of conversation. Let's keep hearing inspiring stories. And especially the high-profile panelists that we have here today that you can lead by example. And as a first question that maybe will go to Edward, I would like to hear from you. Let's talk about examples, how we can lead by examples. If you can share one tangible thing that you are doing today that is truly changing the decarbonization curve, but not thinking in the long-term net zero goals, but now. Now.
Well, actually, I can maybe share 2, if that's okay. In the Bouygues Group, we're first taking action for our own emissions, of course, like I think most companies, and it's measurable. We've already reduced our emissions between 23 and 24 by 1.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent out of a total of about 21 million. So that's through changing the types of vehicles we're using. Our cars are also industrial vehicles, and through all the other classical actions. And then there's the second one, which I think is very important, is we offer solutions through several of our businesses for our customers to reduce their own emissions. And I can come back on that, but for example, Equance offers lots of solutions to change the equipment that you're currently using in your company, in your factory, for example, to make it a more efficient equipment, for example, changing the heating systems to heat pumps, and that's an immediate gain.
Definitely. So there is the internal gain, and your customers also winning from that.
We're working on both.
In a really hard-to-abate context of the construction sector. So then keeping this line of questions, of great examples, and so on, and maybe jumping to Wendy, because you work with different companies, so you will really know different sectors, and maybe Josep Maria, also the perspective of the automotive sectors, and it's like, let's be a bit honest, and I would like to hear from you, if companies are really implementing actions in their decarbonization journey just by own requirements, because they have to do so, and if so, if you could please share a concrete example, starting Wendy.
I can share many examples because, frankly, there's an awful lot of organizations and companies that are moving way beyond what's required because there's an opportunity to go beyond what's required. At BCG alone, our emissions from our 2018 baseline are down more than 50%. Right? That's a significant change. That's actually cost saving for us. It's a good thing. And when I look more broadly at companies, we work with a CEO Alliance of Climate Champions under the WEF umbrella. They have reduced emissions more than 10% already since their baseline. They've got about 10% of the global emissions baseline. They're in 12 sectors, they're 27 countries. This is not a narrow slice of the economy. This is a broad-based slice of the economy, 10% down on a very significant percent of the global baseline. Europe's at about 3% reduction right now. The US is about 2%. That's way beyond what is required and faster than much of the economy is moving. Totally doable. A third thing I'd love to talk about is something called the First Mover Coalition. First Mover Coalition is an organization of companies that say, we don't want the stuff that's somewhat decarbonized. We want the products to go into our supply chains that are maximally decarbonized, that pushing the boundaries on what's possible. SAF at 90%, 95% carbon reduction, aluminum, steel, very heavily decarbonized. first mover creating advanced purchase commitments, helping manufacturing scale up, and actually doing offtake now. And so groups of companies coming together to send the demand signals that allow a much, much faster scale up happening across some of the harder to decarbonize industries. So there's an awful lot that's happening now that goes frankly well beyond what is required in any geography.
That's inspiring. Josep, Maria?
I think that before giving you the answer, I think it's important that everybody understand what obliges us the legislation as of today, right? We as a car manufacturer, we are obliged to comply with a certain limits of CO2 emission in our fleets. This is the law, and this is what we have to comply. To answer your question is, what do we do more than complying with the CO2 emissions in our fleets? Well, what we have taken as a decision as a group is to tackle the entire value chain as a whole. Not only the tailpipe emissions, which is the law, the CO2 emissions in the exhaust pipe, but the entire value chain. What does it mean, the entire value chain? It's the cradle to grave. So we take the entire supply chain, we take the entire supply activities, our assembly lines, the development, and the commercialization, and we try to lower down that carbon footprint, right? So imagine, for example, how much carbon footprint does it sounds? Hola? Does it work? Yeah? Okay. Imagine a carbon footprint of a standard vehicle, 50 tons equivalent of CO2, right? So if we would only tackle one portion of that, which is the law, we would lower down maybe 80% of that carbon footprint. We want to do more. What does it mean? We work in the upstream, we go to the materials, to the supply chains, to the assembly lines, and we reduce the carbon footprint with sourcing panels that allow us to reduce that. But it's not only that, it's also to use green and renewable energy sources to lower down the consumption in our plants and in our supplier park. And not only that, in the life cycle, we want to recycle all materials to have a perfect closed loop. So this is what we do on top the legislation obliges us as of today.
Thank you, and I think this that you're mentioning of really addressing the whole entire chain is something that I would like to bring on later on because it's a great point of discussion. And I think it's also important, as you're mentioning, like we need to tackle many problems, many challenges. So let's put the focus now a bit on the challenges that we are facing right now. And one of them that we cannot ignore is, of course, how is the fast-changing context that we live at, no? And when we are talking about decarbonization, we are talking about net zero goals that are in the long term, 2050, 2040, that requires, of course, strategies that define long-term objectives. But in that regard, and I think it's a question relevant to all of you, maybe starting with José María, no, the Chief Strategy Officer of Renault Group, is in this fast-changing context, how can companies define sustainable strategies?
Well, what I would say is that sustainability, or even ESG, if you want to call it like this, is well anchored in our strategy, right? So 100% anchored in every decision that we are taking. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, right? So decarbonization. Decarbonization is a fundamental pillar for the Renault Group towards the next decade global emission reductions. But not only, because sustainability goes beyond decarbonization, even though decarbonization is a strong pillar. It's also about our people, right? In the sustainability path, there is a responsibility from our side to go along with our employees and workforce and transform them. So programs of upskilling and reskilling our employees are also very important in our strategy. But also safety standards. So we are a car producer, we are commercializing vehicles, and beyond the regulation of a star rating, we want to offer really true matter safety standards in our vehicles, just to name some of them.
Thank you. I don't know if Edward, Wendy would like to react.
Sure. Would you like to start, Wendy?
You go first, Edward.
Thank you.
I'll follow.
Well, in terms of adapting, I think any company, any business has to constantly adapt. That's a given. I think in our group, where we're lucky in the Bouygues group, is that we're a construction company first. And in construction, you're always adapting to your client's needs. Everything we build is a prototype. It's the first time we build this specific type of building, this specific type of tunnel, of bridge, hospital, or anything else. So we're always adapting, and by adapting, we also try to bring this constant adaptation towards sustainability. So for example, our customers are asking us for new solutions that use less concrete, because we all know the emissions of concrete. So we're teaching our workforce to work with wood, to build using wooden structures as much as possible. You can't do everything with wood, but you can do many things, like some of this stage, for example. And we're working on these solutions. We're also bringing solutions to our customers in terms of how their building can be better conceived and use less energy for heating, cooling, etc. And that's the kind of long-term business with our customers that we're having.
And it's interesting because we are tend to think we need innovation, we need technology, but maybe this solution, it seems like low tech, and
the ones that have the most impact at the moment are not the coolest shiny inventions. They're sometimes very simple things. For example, when we take care of the lighting in large cities, most of them are using sodium bulbs, which use a lot of energy. We change them by LEDs. Okay, it's not super spectacular, but it's a 70% decrease in electricity consumption for lighting in that city. And that counts.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the most important thing that we're talking about is that it's not a sustainability strategy on the side. I think what you're hearing from all of us is that it's sustainability embedded in the corporate strategy, embedded in the business strategy. It's not about doing something separate, it's about saying when we do procurement, how do we make sure that it's also green and therefore also cost saving? How do we actually think about our supply chains and make sure that they are sustainable, resilient, and inclusive? It's not about doing things separately, it's really about just embedding those principles in everything that we do with our strategy, because that's when you actually both capture the opportunity of sustainability, but equally important, capture the value.
Yeah, so at the heart of the organization, in their mission, in their vision, they truly need to believe on that. But of course it's a challenge. So keeping the focus on challenges and moving a question very much focused on Jose Maria, because I would like to talk about the automotive sector that is suffering major sweeps. We all know that. I would like to ask, like considering that, you are very tight on regulation, the fines, on carbon emissions, and so on one hand, but maybe on the other hand, in some countries, in some sectors, maybe there is no full customer acceptance on these electric vehicles. I would like to hear from you, how do you see the future of the automotive sector? And is this your biggest challenge you're facing right now?
It's a good question, right? So everybody is asking me that question, how it's going to look like the automotive sector in 10, 15 years, right? I can explain you a science fiction movie, right? But the truth is I'm going to mistake, because everything is going to happen faster and the transformation is going to be deeper than we can imagine, right? So our ability is how to manage uncertainty and volatility, right? How can we keep the pace of competitiveness and profitability without jeopardizing sustainability and climate change objectives? This is our major challenge as of today. But at the same time, how can we guarantee competitiveness? Because we can discuss hours and hours about sustainability and climate change objectives, but if we do not make it guaranteeing, believe me, guaranteeing European sovereignty and competitiveness, everything that we are debating here will be over, right? We can discuss about all that because we are competitive. As long as we are competitive, we can debate about that. If not, it's game over.
Thank you. And in that regard, I would like to bring back what you were mentioning before, like you are working all across the value chains, because it's true that many companies are really successful in reducing high percentage of carbon emissions, especially on scope 1, scope 2 emissions. But I recall, Wendy, when we discussed this panel a couple of weeks ago, you were mentioning that actually you're working a lot on scope 3 that in many cases represent the largest amount of the carbon footprint of a company. So in that regard, maybe you can share with us what is the most effective approach to tackle these emissions, and especially considering complex and global supply chains.
Yeah, well, it's the largest, usually scope 3 is the largest amount, but it's also a huge risk for companies. I mean, I'll point to another auto company that had a flood in one of their suppliers. One flood, one supplier, and they had the largest single intraday stock price that they'd ever had because they ended up having to delay delivery of more than 1,000 units, right? It's also incredibly important right now to be building adaptation and resilience into the supply chain to defend against the extreme weather that we're seeing more frequent, more severe related to climate change. So let me start there. But what you're talking about, Reka, about working across supply chains, unfortunately, in the latest CDP survey, it's only about 4 of every 10 companies that are really engaging with their suppliers and engaging proactively with their supply chain. And that is a massive unlock when that happens, both in terms of the economic of what's possible, in terms of decarbonization, improving sustainability, improving resilience, but also just the fluidity and the extent of the magnitude of what actually can happen and how that value gets shared across it. One of the places that we've been working across the value chain is with Dow Chemical. And we worked with them on something called a carbon footprint ledger, which is how do you actually get the greenhouse gas emissions and the understanding at a product level, and how do you actually trace that value through the supply chain and the intent of sharing that value through the supply chain. And when you actually engage with suppliers, both sometimes, and many companies are starting to put requirements on their suppliers, but also in terms of the education, the support, the sharing of the digital tools across the supply chain, again, that can unlock a lot of what's possible. And it also changes the equation on the economics. If you look at a lot of the steel costs, fully decarbonized steel may mean a 50% increase in cost at one stage of a value chain. But to put fully decarbonized steel in a car, it's probably about 2% of the end cost of the car in terms of increase, because there's so many other components that go in. And so how do you start thinking in terms of whole value chains? The whole value chains of suppliers working together, both to build that decarbonization, but also to build that resilience.
Maybe building on that, right? So I think that there is a kind of co-responsibility action to be taken very seriously in that respect, right? You are mentioning supply chain, responsible supply chain processes or management, right? But it's true that, we like it or not, let's accept that decarbonization implies an extra cost, right? So how many of the customers are ready to pay a price premium for that extra cost, right? You have an European-made vehicle that maybe is 2 times more expensive than a non-European-made vehicle, maybe not compliant with ESG, maybe not compliant with sustainability, and maybe not decarbonized. What is going to be the selection of the customer at the very end, right? Because if the customer does not buy the story that decarbonization, sustainability, ESG are real return for the European society, then why are we doing that if the customer is not asking that? So that kind of dilemma, that kind of question has to be well addressed by everybody, right? And accept the constraints and the extra cost that decarbonization implies.
Definitely, and actually that's what I wanted to ask you next, because this is critical when we need to talk about competitiveness. Competitiveness, we tend to think more sustainable products, more expensive production processes, more increased prices for our customers. So maybe a question all of you can answer, maybe, but we can start with Edward. We don't have much time left, but it's critical that we discuss that. No, how can companies balance this decarbonization and profitability and still remain competitive, especially talking in international markets, working across different countries and sectors?
Yeah. So we don't see decarbonization as only a cost. It is a cost sometimes, most of the time, but it's also for us an opportunity to sell new products, new solutions to our customers. And we try to always present it with the payback time or the ROI, so that our B2B customers understand that they can recoup their investment. It's an investment, really, and they can recoup their investment sometimes quite fast. Equance has started a new a company called Carbon Shift, which groups all of our decarbonization solutions. And when they'll visit your business, they'll visit your factory, for example, I'll take your number at the end, and we'll call you and visit some of your factories, and they can list everything we can offer, from the fastest ROI to the longest. And some of these investments will save you tons of CO2 within 1, 2, or 3 years. Yeah. Some of them are longer, but many are very quickly recouped, and then you start making money after those years. So this is something of an opportunity to us.
Excellent.
I would just add there is a huge diversity across industries in terms of the cost of decarbonization. There's a lot of industries where it's really tough and it's only a small percent of the cost, less than 10%, where you can actually do cost savings. There are other industries where you can get 50% of the carbon out and you're actually saving cost. And so the diversity across industries means the opportunity for what you can do in a cost and carbon way is highly, highly diverse.
Yeah, thinking sustainability across the 3 legs, no? Environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, and social sustainability. 2 minutes left, so maybe we have time for this final question again, like a final remark, like a closing to this session. A question for all of you to be answered very shortly. And it's okay, let's imagine, let's be positive. We have reached those net zero goals. We have decarbonized the industry. Then, what do you think will be the biggest challenge that will come next? Maybe it's now here and we don't talk about it enough.
Well, what I would say is that we have to guarantee, when we have reached that kind of net zero goals, that we have done it in a very fair manner, right? Maintaining a competitive industrial and technological ecosystem in Europe, that it has not diminished our ability to generate wealth and progress across the society, because it has to be our fundamental goal, right? That everything that we are doing as an economical actor, all that, beyond rewarding the shareholder, which is our mandate, we also transfer that progress into the society. This has been the speciality of Renault Group in France, but of the entire automotive sector in Europe. And I think that this is the crucial element to guarantee for the next decades to come.
I'd build on that and say society needs to thrive. And to do that, we also need to make sure that we address all the elements of the just transition. We're going to lose a lot of jobs in the green transition. It's going to create more jobs, but they're not always in the same places. It's not always the same skill set. And so how do we actually make sure we're addressing the human side and really enabling society to thrive through the transition and after?
Thank you.
I think what we saw in the previous keynote, the starting keynote, was that there's not just, you can't just do one thing that's going to save us all from the problem. It's going to be a massive amount of little things that are going to contribute to reducing our emissions and making us more sustainable. And you know, we're still in the learning curve. We're trying things and we see that they destroy something else, so we stop and then we try another one. I think the future is going to be all about balancing all these different things that we do, all these actions, recycling, reusing, etc., to get to something that works for us and our planet.
This systemic thinking approach, bringing all together into play. So I think it's perfect, excellent way to finish. Thank you very much to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.